Michael Ostrolenk here, and I am with Raphael Vitón. He is an innovation, leadership, and business transformational professional. How you doing, Raph?
Good, Michael. How are you?
Fantastic. So you and I met 2014 at Seal Fits and Vito Mine Academy. Good interaction. Been following your work ever since. Love the articles you write. Put up a lot about it on LinkedIn. You are what you call a hands-on interventionist and global practitioner. I'll just read a little bit about your background and stuff. You're a former expat, corporate strategist, and president and owner of two creative strategy firms advising 25% of the Fortune 100 companies. You're also one of Axialent's global transformation leads focused on VUCA environments, helping leaders implement generative, drama-free corporate lifestyle habits while building processes and skills-based tool boxes that create more agile, adaptive, engaged businesses. You know, one of the things that you and I have kind of gone back and forth on a lot of the social media conversations that we've had is that we are transitioning from an industrial age to a post-industrial age, and that if corporations want to not only survive but thrive, they need new ways of thinking about leadership, cultural forms, processes in place that, as you say in your biography, make them more agile and adaptive to the ever-changing environments that we live in. Love for you to start talking about how you work with companies that do that. But before we do, can you just give us a little bit more of a background, what led you to be what I would call an evolutionary change agent?
Sure, yeah, and it's been a bit of a follow my nose kind of a career, if you will, being very opportunistic, and the journey for myself has been one of learning and building the toolbox that I see is a transformation toolbox kind of all along. Originally starting with kind of the corporate strategy toolbox, shifted then into process re-engineering consulting, so you build up these standard operating procedures and all that kind of documentation and ideal or current state to ideal state, re-engineering type work, then into creative brand strategy and organizational work, and eventually into, I never felt like a better advisor than when I was partnered with an innovation consulting firm out west almost 15 years ago, helping one of the biggest, most iconic brands in the U.S., Wrangler jeans of all, reposition themselves and redefine their future in the context of the consumer shift that had happened. And in that process, of feeling like, wow, now I have my hands on some of the gears and levers that really help influence business, really helps influence leaders. That's why I started about 15 years worth of just focused on creating and building a specialized innovation consulting firm. So best practices, emerging best practices in innovation, and quickly learned that no matter how good the process was and how good the deliverables were coming out of the process, if the organization itself, if the community of human beings that we're going to have to implement and leverage those assets, if they were not also transformed in the process, the value couldn't be released. And in becoming more aware of that, I realized how much work I had to do on myself and could use myself as the guinea pig along the way to better serve the leaders that I'm helping ready for the future.
Well, actually, let's start there. Talk about your own personal transformation, not only in light of the need to do it for yourself, because it's a useful series of exercises to grow and develop oneself, but how that then affected the way you work with people within companies.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's probably the typical story, and probably a very fortunate story, rather than one of a middle-age crisis type scenario, where rather than because of a severe illness or trauma, which many people go through, which is what leads to their own transformation. I think I just had that gradual, what am I doing? Who am I? I don't think I like myself that much anymore. I don't think I'm that cool anymore. I was so much cooler when I was younger. And then, when I was 20, and that's when you're 40 looking back and you're starting to have kids, and all of a sudden, at least I went through, which is what sounds very typical and textbook, is the kind of the opening of what am I missing, and what beliefs do I hold so true and so strongly, and which ones of those are true and which ones of those might not be true, which ones don't serve me so well anymore, and man, how am I going to be a good dad? I got to be a good dad. Like, I think I'm a great business leader because I could start businesses and hold my own with any C-suite. But am I going to be a good dad? I'm probably a pretty shitty father or husband. I don't want to be a shitty dad. How do I actually, make sure I'm improving on those fronts? And it mirrored many of the transition fronts that I saw needing to happen as a leader in business. It's the same. You're a leader. The leader you are at the office is the kind of leader you are typically at home. Whatever community of people you're leading, you kind of show up the same way whether you know it or not.
Well, actually, let me challenge you on that and then ask you about that too, because it seems to me that in the more recent past, the integrity that you're just discussed, the integrity of you as a human being in your home space and you as a human being in your workspace, and that you should be the same type of person in both spaces, it seemingly is a newer idea, not necessarily new, but a newer idea that's being implemented by people such as yourself. But in the further past, that people would kind of make distinctions. Like, you could be a shitty human being at home and not really care about your kids and your wife, or if you're a woman, your husband, and still kick ass at work. But what I hear you saying is that integrity.
Right.
So what I hear you saying is integrity as a human being comes first, and how it's expressed in different locations it comes out of that original integrity.
Well, yeah, and I used to have such an aversion to the word integrity, and it was because I hadn't studied it and really understand it. I thought it was a self-righteous way of talking about yourself, when really all it means is that you're walking the talk.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned along the way, both in business and personal, is you can't walk the talk unless you're fully aware of how your beliefs and mindsets affects your behavior, which affects the way you interact with other people and business systems, other systems, and that's what leads to results. And so my lack of awareness and my lack of understanding of what are my values, what do I really care about, what kind of leader do I really want to be, and how do I really want to contribute. I wasn't focused on that. I was just focused on the it of the I, we, and the it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just focused on achieving the results, and blocked out probably those other parts of it. How am I affecting the relationships as I'm achieving those results? How am I showing up as a human being? What values do I represent apparently as I'm pursuing those results? And with blinders on, not seeing those other two aspects, those other two dimensions of success, man, it's very limiting with how fulfilling, what fulfillment you get out of it, and limiting with how far you can go with it. Because, as we all know, leading through any type of a transition to a higher level and next level, you typically can't do it on your own. You need the help of others. You need the expanded perspectives that others bring. You need to learn how to work together to collaborate in a way that just opens up the possibilities to, exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when you're half asleep and unconscious, just going through life with the habits that you were successful enough with growing up, you miss half of that until you wake up.
You mentioned I, we, and it. We'll kind of explore that in a little while. We'll start by exploring the I. What are some of the things that you did in terms of practices, utilization of certain tools, exercises that helped you become more multi-perspective, open-hearted, more caring, compassionate, more thoughtful, bigger thinker, et cetera, some of the qualities that you just talked about?
Sure. Well, I think unfortunately, a large part of my transformation, I'd say the first 10, 15 years of transforming were done the old-fashioned, effective way of just trying harder. And, not knowing how to try harder. I'd read books and I'd listen to a few things and I was like, oh, I can be better. And it just, thankfully, back in about 2008 or 2009, my business partner and I at the time, we both went to the Stegan Integral Leadership Academy in Dallas. So it's a year-long program, 52-week, hardcore, very intense implementation program of practices that you do individually together with your cohort, and went through that delivered practice cycle of 52 weeks and have been a part of that community ever since. I actually now teach.
Nice.
I'm an adjunct faculty inside of that academy now. Still learning on all the same content that I learned back then. But I was taught all of it back then. I'm still just learning it now. And I'll tell you, that was the key. That was where I learned the difference and the path to mastery being deliberate, focused practice, as opposed to how we typically learn, which is hacking and dabbling and kind of really not sure if we're growing or not. But trying, giving it the college try, but which is very different from actually training.
And I want to speak to your point, hacking versus discipline. But before I do, I have to point out that we probably share Bert Parley in common, right?
Share what?
Bert Parley.
Bert, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Master Jedi at the Stegan Academy.
Yep.
I'm still just Jedi in training. He is Super Master Jedi.
That's cool. I've known Bert since the Integral Institute days, early 2000s. So very small world.
Yeah.
Cool. So, but you've actually written about this in some of your more recent, this last year, writings that you've done, making really distinctions between the hacking, which is useful and a very American phenomenon because we want things immediate, versus the necessity of actually having a deep discipline to change not just states, but move to a higher stage of complexity in thinking or whatever you're trying to work on. Can you talk about that in your personal life? And then let's kind of move over to the we area and talk about how you've taken some of these transformations in yourself and either apply them into your own business that you run, and then how you started translating that into the work you do for other businesses.
Sure. Well, in the articles that you referenced, and even the book from I think that was 2012, maybe the book. All those things are looking at, okay, how do I, if I'm not satisfied with my current level results, and which comes from the thinking patterns and the default behaviors, default reactive patterns that I have. If I'm not satisfied with the results I'm getting there, I clearly have a next level in mind, where next level results would come from. And if I have visibility of that gap, that shows me what opportunities I have to learn, right? And looking at that, and it's usually very specific. Ideally, you do the gap analysis, right? You've got some specific things you want to change that matter to me, right? Not esoterically matter to me. Like personally, I've decided those things matter to me. I want that next level, and I see what things I need to change. And then it is about asking for help and prototyping, iterating what exercises, what training specifically helps me get closer to that. Typically I need to build certain kind of muscles, as a metaphor, mental muscles, whatever, new thinking patterns, new paradigms, new mental models that help me make that shift. And I need to figure out which tools help me train and build those muscles. And it's many of the tools and the practices, many of them, myself and others, we don't always find great utility in them, right? Even though I'm sure those tools work for other people, certain ones work for me that don't necessarily work for other people, and some work for both of us great, whatever. But you have to practice to see which ones work. You have to really get them in your hands and play with them and see which ones feel good, which ones you want to keep practicing with. And some you need to force yourself to practice because they are that good, and some just feel good and you're motivated to keep practicing. And then you have to build. And personally, I have a morning, and this became much more deliberate as I went through the SEALFIT Academy with you, and learned from that program that you helped build with Mark Devine, building the morning ritual and the nighttime ritual, and which kind of bookends the day of priorities, bookends the day of am I walking the talk with the training, and am I making progress that I say matters to me, and am I open to learn the things I know I need to learn, and am I willing to put in the time to do it, and am I getting energy from it as opposed to is it a drag, and have I kind of mentally prepared myself in a way that I look forward to the training, which is how it becomes sustainable. Because if it's not sustainable, chances are I'm not going to make it to that next level.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
It does. Can you give a couple examples of some of the practices that you found for you very helpful, and then maybe transition from there into some of the things that you've done culturally?
That everybody you hear about them all the time, and there were ones I've resisted for years because it's just that's not me. One is journaling, performance journaling. We like to call it. I think when you call it performance journaling or game filming, that's when guys go, oh yeah, I'll do that. I'm not going to journal though, you know. But so whatever you call it, however you frame it, and there's that kind of concern if I'm not doing it right. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. And there's a few simple questions that I journal each morning. At night, I do have a very diligent tracking system for workouts. I have journal logs that I keep that are daily, in addition to the morning and nighttime ritual stuff. And it's an ongoing intersection of communities of practice, for me anyway, is part of how I build the practice, the daily practice into a weekly, a monthly, a quarterly, and a year. There's an annual planning process, there's quarterly goals, and you track it weekly. That's how I do it. Now it's obscene in some ways in terms of the spreadsheet tabs and things, but for me that's how I operationalize the idea of deliberate practice, and it just makes it visible to me, right? It's feedback. It's a feedback mechanism for me to see how I'm tracking with my training.
So tell us about how you turn your personal transformations over time into different ways of working with clients. And let me just, for audience sake, give some ideas of some of the clients you've worked with. Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Cisco, ESPN, GE Healthcare, VF Corp, Walmart, Wrangler. So, Fortune 100 companies.
Yeah, I've embarrassed myself a lot with a lot of those companies, for sure. In the process of I think iterating and prototyping lots of these concepts, typically when I'm in the room or my team's in the room with leaders of companies like that, is because they've got a specific innovation initiative that they need outside help on, right? And that's in the context of a bigger innovation strategy, bigger longer-term growth strategy that they have to increase their competitiveness in the market, increase some capability that they have, position them for the future in some way that gives them an advantage. And in that process, inviting those leaders, while they're paying $1 million to do this innovation strategy work, to build these assets, that's a perfect opportunity to invite them to train while they're and learn while doing, if you will. And in most cases, without that business reason to practice some of this stuff, there's no incentive for them to try. There's no connectivity. It's just theoretical, intellectual, and all of these leaders, they got way more horsepower, I would say, than I do as far as the intellectual capability, and they're wicked smart, super successful, and often that's the thing that gets in the way of them being able to let go of what they know in favor of learning something new, especially the stuff that's outside of that seems counterintuitive to them from a business sense, let alone a personal sense, right? So what I've found to be most useful and most effective with leaders, and again, it's because it's where I found leverage, is if I can help them see where building sources of certainty, I call it, sources of certainty, which become them documenting their values as a human being, their purpose, and thinking about the things that they build and document for the company all the time, right? They document and are very clear about what the core values of the company are, what the mission statement of the company is. But when I ask them, do you have those for yourself? And they go, no, I don't have that. Well, I said, do you have a plan for the year for yourself? Do you know what goals you personally want to achieve? How does the company fit in with your personal goals? And there's usually, they don't have that connection. So I start with, okay, well, in the face of uncertainty, in the face of volatility, complexity, and ambiguity, in the face of VUCA, right? In the face of that, and this new world that you're leading your company into, let's give you some sources of certainty that we know don't have to change while you're experimenting with the new stuff. Let's give you a place that, like a home base, that you can return to, a strong foundation that you can stand on that says, while I'm pursuing that new stuff, which could be scary, could be who knows what, I'm going to feel strong because I'm going to stay focused on the things that matter most to me. My family, spirituality, physical, like all those things. Like let me tangibly see those things and document them in a way that I can hold on tight to them while I'm letting go of some of those other beliefs and some of those other things that are counterproductive now, right? Command and control was great during the industrial era, right? Certain ways of leading people worked tremendously to build value and build companies. Today, in the hyper-connected world, the internet world, many of those old biases, biases that were not built for the network age, are not that helpful anymore. But yet leaders still behave out of those default habits. And there's this leadership complexity gap then that is actually separated between where we're operating with certain fundamental beliefs and principles and behaviors of the past, old success formulas that worked well before, and we know, because we're pursuing innovation strategy, we know we need a new master plan, but I can't let go of these old habits because I know those worked. Those new things, I don't know if they work or not. So it's a matter of how do I feel strong with filling in, my tendency to fill in gaps of information where there are none. And in the future, there are big gaps of information because we haven't been there yet. And so how do I navigate into that new space and feel strong while doing it? Well, I need sources of certainty that help me do that.
How do you help folks have the state changes to at least to see the possibilities of the limitations of their previous biases and worldviews and the possibilities of what you're suggesting to them, new worldviews, while you're also helping them ground in some of the more personal, spiritual, emotional, physical, mental spaces?
Well, two clear ways. One is you just let them suffer by doing it the old way, and just keep asking, how's that working for you? I mean, typically, most companies and leaders that I work with, if they have not suffered enough by just trying hard, doing it the old way, they're really not open to trying the things I'm going to suggest that they try. And so typically, and this is so interesting. So often, I remember in the early days of doing the innovation consultancy stuff, I used to feel my energy trying to persuade people that innovation's good and innovation's what you need and it's going to make you happy. Like, you'll get everything you want if you become a better innovator. And I realized, wow, that doesn't work. It creates this, it almost creates like this backfire effect. People thinking I'm saying you're doing everything wrong, you're broken and you need to be fixed, which just creates, a kind of impasse of them saying, I'm not doing it wrong, you're wrong, and I learned after unsuccessfully, soapboxing for too long, to just get off the soapbox and be available for the people who have their hand up in the air saying, I'm ready to change, I'm ready to try some new things, what I've been doing isn't working, I need to change faster. You started off our conversation with the business recognition. Most CEOs profess that they're going to be 3 years from now leading significantly transformed corporations. I think the KPMG study last year says 4 out of 10 CEOs have explicitly said significantly transformed companies. So business model change, reorg, massive transformation. And those other 6 out of 10 are slightly transformed companies. I don't know what that means, but the idea of the amount of change that's going to happen in this time period is going to be exponential compared to the rate of change in the past. So they're somewhat ready, but they don't necessarily know how. There's this often the belief that I'm going to command and control my way through transformation, which creates a lot of suffering and unnecessary damage to the system even, and issues with retention, which and costs just go up, and you don't even attract better talent because they know it's a toxic environment perhaps. And so it winds up being, find the ones who have their hand in the air saying, I'm ready to change, I'm ready to do the deeper work of transformation, both individually as a leader, because we invite the leaders first to be an example of change, and suggest to them that you don't even know what you're asking your next level leaders to do differently, unless you yourself have been through a part of that process. And then you need to be in community learning with them. So the idea of a peer-based learning community, where it's no longer hierarchical, or less hierarchical at least, right? Where the leader says, I need to learn how to be more agile. I need to learn new thinking patterns. I need to increase my mental complexity to lead this company into the future. So we're going to learn this together, okay? That's when the C-suite and the executive team says, okay, next level, our leaders, and the next level go, yeah, and we're going to mentor the next, 10,000 employees underneath us in that same way, because that's how adult development works. It's not we're going to go to a few workshops and we're going to have a few, corporate communication slogans, and we're going to be changed.
Are you sure?
Right. Well, and interestingly, that's where I find kind of that my market value, my usefulness, where I can be of most service to companies and leaders, is that connection between innovation strategy and learning and development, where somewhere in the middle there, change management gets involved, but change management in corporations is usually a communication type of practice. So I think I'm able to be a bridge in between kind of those three functions, if you will, and help, I think, get ahead of the stuff that's going to trip up the organization, the false starts they're going to have, and the things that even create more distance between what the community people are saying. Typically call them BS on core values, because most companies already have in their core values innovative and collaborative, but they don't behave that way. And there's all kinds of organizational contradictions that the engagement studies are already saying we're not doing well, and many times the declaration of innovation or transformation from the CEO turns into a terrible false start with again, nice, well-intended things, but it's not very expert ways of, you start doing crowdsourcing contests and things that just don't really do the deep work of transformation. It's not the best example of adult development in practice. And adult development isn't a new thing. Like there's plenty of research and documentation around what works well. If you want to accelerate, deepen the learning, there's ways to do it, and that's where we would come in, and it'd be connecting very deliberately the business strategy, which is typically being undermined by the leaders themselves. Like they have this great growth strategy, but the behavior and mindsets undermine it as opposed to amplify it. We help them see that, help them articulate what the ideal strategy is, map out the gap, and then build a plan that they have some influence in on how fast you want to get there.
So, sounds like one of the things you do is kind of hold up a mirror to the upper level management CEO folks, right? And I'm wondering, what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen when they look in the mirror and see themselves and see the fact that they're not living up to the values in which they purport to do and want the company to follow?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges typically are just to be able to internalize that. Even with all the data. Again, by the time we get there, there's been consecutive years of engagement studies showing that gap. There's been, I was just in a multi-billion-dollar corporation doing a beautiful engagement with the leadership who's ready, who's doing the deep work. And I was reading their engagement survey, and I said, can I please see the verbatims? Not just what are the numbers, but let me see the verbatims that people type in. And in my years of doing this work, I have never seen the volume of verbatims of human beings saying something like, to this effect, like the number of human beings saying to this effect, I wish the leaders of this company would treat me like a human being. And again, this isn't like a terrible, horrible company or group of leaders, but there's that disconnect, and the volume being expressed in words, not just in numbers, right? And you see the leadership struggling with how to internalize the data. Like the data's there, but it's so hard to believe that my company, this is happening. It must be just the front lines. It must be just the call centers saying, who writes that kind of stuff anyway? Who is so blatant in an engagement study? Who knows we're going to read this? Who writes that stuff? And the answer is the unled write that stuff.
Do you?
Right? And it just giving that to them in a way that isn't, you don't let them out of it, right? You can see that they're wrestling with it, trying to internalize it, but they're really trying to avoid it, minimize it, in much in the same way that we do with any kind of information that contradicts our biases and our beliefs. We try to minimize the validity of it. We try to pretend we don't hear it because it's kind of shaking our system, our mental models, if you will. It's changing a paradigm or bumping up against a paradigm. And when you just don't let them out of it, let them see that it's okay to address it. Let them see that this isn't the system saying you're a bad person. It's telling you, it's a feedback, it's feedback data for you to recognize there's something different for you to do. There's something for you to learn. Are you open to learning? And that's when, just if you reframe it into questions, they almost always go, yes, I want to learn. Yes, I want to fix it. Yes, I care. Do you care about those core values that these people are saying aren't lived well here? Yes, I do care about it. Do you want to change? Do you want to do something about it? Yes, I do. So it's really just confronting them with their own power and their freedom to choose to do something differently. And that's when they choose to make the shift.
Would you say that as we transition from the conventional industrial age to the post-industrial age, besides obviously the technology changes and some of the things along those lines, that a key ingredient in the transition, if a company wants to be successful, not just survive but thrive, is humanizing the relationships, the processes, the connections at any level and all levels? It sounds like that is a key part of what you just experienced.
I would say the language, one of the phrases I use all the time is that if I'm in the room with you, we're going to demystify innovation processes. We're going to just demystify that whole idea of innovation as if it's the domain of these select, special, few creative people, right? Like anybody can do innovation, and you need all different perspectives to do it. And we're going to rehumanize those innovation efforts inside of companies. And by rehumanizing it, it means we're going to put faces on it. It's not just procedural, it's relational. And it's almost always, it's amazing when the leaders actually see how for years perhaps they have been trying to fix relational issues with procedural solutions. Like when you see an org structure that's all cockamamie, and you get into the nitty-gritty of what was behind how it evolved that way, it typically is a byproduct of powerful leaders not working well together, so the org structures have been created around them, as opposed to addressing the tension in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And if you're not equipped to address the tension in a healthy way, you address it in an unhealthy way, or you avoid it altogether. And innovation is, that's what innovation is, right? It is dealing with the tension between the core business right now and the future business. And it's you can either look at it in a way that is, or if you're not ready to deal with that tension in a healthy, constructive, generative way, like if you don't have the Jedi toolbox, and you haven't been trained, you haven't built, you haven't had years of readying those muscle groups, collaboration, agility, openness, all that stuff, if you don't have that type of training, you're going to resort to dealing with it in an unhealthy way, or you're not going to address it. So there's always unaddressed tensions that just get worse over time. They don't get better. That eventually need to be addressed. And Axialent, the company out of Argentina that I do a lot of culture transformation with, and these are the super Jedis doing work with biggest corporations in the world, all over the world, Latin America, Europe, Australia, Spain, and inside the companies that we all know of, like LinkedIn and Microsoft, and big parts of working with the leadership there and the culture change there, and the leadership pipeline work for like the top 2% high potential leaders in many of these companies, it's built around doing that. They call it conscious business. So it's the idea of how do we help businesses be more conscious? Well, we have to work on those muscles that nobody trained us on those growing up. I mean, I'm doing my best to train my kids ever since they were like 3 and 4 years old. I'm teaching them the conscious business toolbox, little by little, planting seeds, and they don't really like daddy's learning lessons that they have to do each month, where I'm it's the same tools that I practice with. I'm trying to get into their hands and into their head early, because imagine how much we would have benefited with some of these tools, or how much suffering we might have avoided.
I'm sure they'll appreciate you in their 20s and 30s and 40s and stuff. And it's really funny too, because a lot of the clients that I work with, and I'm sure you have the same experiences with, who are already in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, wish they had some of the things that they're now developing when they're in their teens and early 20s, and their lives would have been so much different. You mentioned,
to your point, the CEO, who I'm sure is early 60s, of this multinational insurance company that I worked with for years, incredible leader and dear man, said, the invitation was, you need to go first. I need you to model, the learning goals that you have. Like you have to express where you have a gap and how you're going to work to address it with us, so that the other leaders follow suit. Like, oh, if you do it, and the invitation was met with I've never had the luxury of a leadership program like this, a formal program to help me work on myself. I've never had that luxury. Of course I'll do it. It was amazing.
That's awesome. The way you described the chart, kind of separating leaders out, so the conflict is limited, not fixed or solved or anything like that, but the way you described it reminds me of a marriage. And that there are certain processes that are put in place so people actually don't have to face one another and deal with their really challenges that are in a marriage or in a family system. And the way I described you at the very beginning is I called you an evolutionary change agent, and it seems to me that your business is really a vehicle for you for larger cultural change, because as you are working with these CEOs and upper level management and you're changing their insides out, and integrity is kind of part of what you're teaching them, they are making not only their businesses more effective and efficient and humanized, and I'm sure the much more beneficial to people who work there, et cetera, but also benefits people in their other aspects of their lives, their spouses, their kids, friends and family, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you get any feedback from some of these people that you work with, like, wow, not only have you, personally affected positively the business, but the way I'm changing my life is actually changing how I am in my marriage or with my friends or my family.
Yeah, this is, I think anytime anybody, not unique to me, I would say, but anytime people engage in the integral leadership type work, the integrative work, as you know from the SEAL Fit stuff, and other aspects that I know, other communities I know you're in, related to sharing those integral leadership practices, and just opening up people's minds to those dimensions all happening at the same time, and giving them more access to it. I think individuals just find it. They find how it applies to work and at home, and in some cases the tools, they'll tell you, I'm using this at home, and it is creating amazing benefits between me and my wife.
Yeah.
I did use it, and it helped me talk to my teenage son or daughter differently. We handled a challenging situation differently, and it led to a different outcome. So people, I think, on their own, automatically start applying these things in every aspect of their lives, and I think it's because they find the utility in it.
Right.
It's not magical, but it's magical.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the leverage you get from it, it's just like, wow, that is such high leverage. When I see how it affects me and how I show up, right? Yeah.
Right.
And then I see how it affects the way I interact with other people and how we team together to address things. And and what we can accomplish in terms of results, business, family, or otherwise. It just changes all of it. And I call it the when I share with folks the I, the we, and the it. In many cases, nobody's heard that before. Doesn't matter what level executive we're talking to, and I tell them this: I'm going to give you the X-ray goggles. Once I give you these X-ray goggles, you can't ever take them off. You're going to see the world this way, and you teach them the three dimensions of success: I, we, and it, and the impact it has, and how they work together, and where you may be focusing most of your time now, and what's the upside of that, what's the downside of that, where you think you should spend more attention. You know, I, we, or it, and they go, well, I think I should spend more time over here. And you say, why do you think you should spend more time there? Well, actually, if I spend more time there, I'll be happier, my relationship will be stronger, and I'll actually deliver better results. Like it clicks right away,
right.
and they start to. Then you have to have the tools and the weekly training, the daily types of things that help you actually notice where am I focusing my attention. You know, daily. Am I focused differently? Hey, that interaction I had this morning where blood pressure went high and it was intense. Did I show up the way I wanted to that protected, you know, my integrity, that delivered, that treated those other human beings that I was interacting with in a way that I want them to be treated? And did we get the end result we wanted? Or was one of those things compromised? Wow, what do I want to do differently next time based on what I just learned? You know, so that's that's an example of the practices of game filming. And then that stuff percolates, you know, in the morning when you're doing your meditation and stuff, the contemplation practices, all that stuff, as you do it, year over year, based on a gazillion, you know, weeks bolted together, all of a sudden it just starts to show up and change the thinking patterns in ways that your default reactive habits, they're not the same default reactive habits anymore. It's an upgraded operating system that has come online that now it's just much more resourceful. It's much more aligned with what matters most to you if you stay in the practice.
Right on. I'd be remiss without pointing out that you also have a book out. It's called Free the Idea Monkey. Can you give us like the 30-second commercial about the book?
Free the Idea Monkey, to focus on what matters most, how the best leaders come up with the big ideas, and it is a story of, it's a metaphor, a light metaphor, memorable metaphors, Idea Monkeys ringleaders as the two most powerful innovation enabling forces that exist, and it's about the spectrum, the polarity of different types of mindsets and how you need a love affair between the two to make it a healthy tension. So it's everything we've talked about,
right.
But in the context of tips and tricks learned in the trenches from the Fortune 100 companies about what works and how leaders find leverage along the way to be better at innovation.
That's fantastic. Now, you also write on a regular basis. Love your writing. Where can folks find both your book and your writing?
Books are any online, Apple, Amazon, all that stuff. And I tell everybody, I'm not trying to sell books. It's not in the business of selling books. If you want a PDF copy of it, you can just email me.
Okay,
I will
cool.
send you a PDF. Raphael Vitón @gmail.com. My articles are on a conscious business blog. The Axialent conscious business blog. They're on my LinkedIn blog posts, and then circulated all over social media stuff.
Right.
For sure. And I think that's it.
Well, we'll definitely include links to all the stuff in the show notes so folks can learn more about
There's a simple way. Like the name I was given, people misspell my name because it can be spelled lots of different ways. But it's Raphael, like the Ninja Turtle, B like Victor, ITON @gmail.com. Or if you type in as a URL, innovationleadership.training.
Okay.
Innovationleadership.training. That comes to my website, and you can find everything from there.
Cool. Raph, great to talk to you.
Thanks, Michael. Great talking to you too, buddy.
Yeah,
Always fun to jam with you.
Yeah, same. And I'll get this to you soon enough, and hopefully I can have you back on in the near future to continue this conversation. And I look forward to reading your next set of writings.
Coming up soon.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.